Camilla's daughter thought it was just a necklace. She wore it into Windsor without clearance, without shame. And without realizing, every eye in the room would trace that sapphire back to one name, Diana. But what she didn't expect was the royal guard standing watch to speak, to step forward in front of the cameras and fire back. That item was catalogued under memorial lock. It was never cleared for private wear. Gasps echoed, photographers froze, and Camilla's expression shattered, because this wasn't a rumour. It was protocol, broken, publicly. Now, before we show you the moment that brought the room to a halt, and the royal decision that followed behind closed doors, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. And make sure you're subscribed to Guard Watch with the bell icon turned on, because this guard didn't just speak up. He defended the one thing the palace tried to rewrite, Diana's legacy. The chandeliers of Windsor's green drawing room scattered light across polished oak by midday. In 2 days, this space would appear in nearly every British paper as a formal family portrait rehearsal, staged to remind the world of continuity beneath the crown. Staff had been shifting furniture since dawn, arranging velvet ropes to keep press angles pristine, adjusting the symmetry of gilded chairs that hadn't been touched since Elizabeth's final years. Sergeant Tristan Merrick stood just inside the eastern arch. At 36, he wore the Coldstream Guard's scarlet tunic, the way soldiers do after earning it under harder skies. Helmand Province, Kandahar, Lashkar Gah, where other guards stiffened for the cameras. Tristan watched the room like he was still clearing compounds. Windows, exits, movement. He wasn't here for ceremony. He was here for protocol integrity, tasked with security compliance and regalia oversight under Windsor's internal preservation code. 2 palace staff wheeled in a velvet-crated trolley around noon. Satin trays caught the light as they settled it near the inventory table. Laid out across them were tiaras, brooches, heirloom jewels, selected for visual balance during the portrait shoot. Most were designated crown adjacent, items that looked royal but held no state relevance. Tristan's job was to verify that. He moved behind the table as a junior registrar, flipped through laminated cards attached by delicate threads. His eyes stopped on one tray. Sapphire clusters nestled in silk. The centre brooch, unmistakably deep blue, circled by brilliant cut diamonds. He frowned. That piece should have had a tag. Each item on loan from storage carried a unique archival ID and status notation. This one sat untagged among generic display pieces. Tristan waited until the registrar stepped away to take a phone call. Then he glanced down at the inventory ledger near the table's corner without touching the tray. 21 items released from Archive D2. He counted 22 on the tray. He flipped to the end of the ledger and found it. Diana, SB set, not in circulation. Lines struck through, no signature, no clearance stamp. His spine straightened a fraction. He approached the registrar aide when she returned. "Pardon, ma'am. This item wasn't cleared per protocol. Who authorized its release?" She barely glanced up. "Came from household. Orders signed off upstairs. Adjustments happen all the time." "Without accession override?" She gave a tight smile. "It's not your concern, Sergeant." But it was, because in 12 years of guarding royal thresholds, Tristan Merrick had only seen that brooch once before, under glass in the Diana Memorial Archive, marked as untouchable. Now it was missing its tag. He said nothing more, just stepped back to his post and resumed his watch. But something had shifted in his gut, the kind of stillness that only precedes storms. The north wing doors opened with a soft click just before 2 p.m. Laura Lopes walked in, wearing a tailored navy coat dress, modest heels, hair swept into a chignon that tried but failed to mirror her mother's signature bob. She moved with the hesitancy of someone unsure whether to smile or be smiled at. Beside her, her husband Harry adjusted his cufflinks and scanned the ornate hall, like he wasn't quite sure of the rules today either. A few aides dipped their heads. Not quite bows, but respectful nods. She wasn't royal by title, but proximity had its own gravity. Ever since Camilla's elevation to Queen Consort, Laura had begun appearing more frequently beside her mother at select functions. Today, she was scheduled for family coordination rehearsal, a polite term for test shots before the king's spring address. Tristan observed from his position near the tapestry wall. There was no hostility in his posture, just the trained alertness of someone who'd learned to notice what others overlooked. Laura crossed the gallery slowly, brushing a loose strand behind her ear. That's when it caught the light. Around her neck, resting just above her silk blouse, was a pendant. Deep sapphire center, surrounded by a gleaming halo of diamonds, the exact size and shape of the item he'd seen on the tray hours earlier. Tristan's breath didn't hitch. His expression didn't change, but internally, a single sentence echoed. "That's not a copy. That's the piece." He waited for her to pass before turning subtly toward the wardrobe assistant, adjusting photographer's marks on the carpet. When the hallway cleared, he stepped close. Was the necklace cleared for today's shoot? The assistant glanced up, distracted. The pendant? Tristan nodded once. Oh, that came from Her Majesty's drawer. Personal jewellery. They didn't need clearance. Who confirmed that? She shrugged. Household passed it down directly. I just manage mirror angles and hems, Sergeant. He nodded. But the inside of his jaw tightened. It wasn't a private item. That sapphire was Diana's. Everyone close to the crown knew it. The brooch had been photographed dozens of times in the early 90s, then disappeared into preservation after the crash in 97. No redesign was ever sanctioned, no conversion order was ever filed, and now it was around Laura Lopes' neck, transformed into fashion. Tristan said nothing further, but behind the stoicism in his bearing, something had shifted. Not just protocol violation, legacy desecration. He returned to his post, but the silence around him was no longer ceremonial. It was loaded, and it was building. That afternoon, the Windsor Press Hall had the air of rehearsed spontaneity, as if every bouquet placement, every laugh, every greeting was choreographed to appear natural in tomorrow's photos. Long tables were dressed in white linen and softened by low floral centerpieces. Senior correspondents from British and European outlets milled about, armed with notepads, slimline cameras, and the practiced charm of people who knew not to ask real questions in royal rooms. Sergeant Tristan Merrick stood at the edge of the central aisle, flanked by two other Coldstream guards positioned at symmetrical angles across the chamber. Their presence wasn't ceremonial, it was protocol. No formal duty, no salutes. Just presence. Still, disciplined, aware. At 3:10 p.m, the Queen Consort entered. Camilla wore a dark forest green coat dress, understated jewellery, and a velvet sash that held no official significance but conveyed practised gravitas. She smiled as she stepped onto the central platform, flanked by aides and the Lord Chamberlain. To most observers, she looked composed. To Tristan, she looked rehearsed. And then came Laura, still wearing the sapphire pendant. Tristan saw it immediately, the way the lights above caught the sapphire's depth, the way the weight of it shifted gently against her collarbone. He didn't need to verify the mount again. The shape alone gave it away. Slightly oval, surrounded by 12 diamonds, precisely as Diana's brooch had been described in the Royal Heritage Inventory, item D04B. The room hushed slightly as journalists raised their phones for casual candids. Soft clicks of shutters filled the hall, followed by polite laughter as Camilla greeted the press pool. Tristan noticed the change almost instantly. A reporter in the second row, older Fleet Street breed, leaned toward a junior beside him and murmured, "Is that the Spencer sapphire?" The comment wasn't meant for anyone else, but Camilla heard it. Her eyes flicked toward the speaker, then to Laura, then back toward the cameras. She smiled again, a thin, deliberate smile, and kept walking. That's when the tension shifted. Tristan watched the body language ripple through the room, shoulders stiffening, glances exchanged, whispers quickening. It wasn't panic. It was something worse. curiosity laced with implication. Then came the whisper that cracked the silence wide open. Near the catering station, a man in a press badge said just loud enough for it to travel, "Looks better on her than it ever did on Diana." Tristan didn't flinch, but his fingers curled inward against the leather of his scabbard. It was a ceremonial sword, not drawn, not used, but tradition had given it weight. Not as a weapon, as a symbol of restraint. An aide stepped beside him. "Her Majesty requests you escort the photographers near the corridor. They're crowding the frame." He gave a sharp nod and moved toward the edge of the hall, but his eyes stayed fixed on the sapphire. Not just because it was out of place, but because it didn't belong to the woman wearing it. It belonged to a legacy, one sealed, protected, and now paraded under soft lights for a room full of lenses. And for the first time in a decade of service, Sergeant Tristan Merrick felt something stronger than duty. He felt the edge of defiance. For a few seconds, the hall existed in two worlds. The formal rehearsal frozen in polished poise, and the undercurrent of murmurs pulsing beneath it. Camilla's aides pretended not to hear the whispers, smiling with brittle precision. The air felt stretched thin, as though the chandeliers themselves were listening. Tristan stood motionless by the dais steps, the tall black bearskin hat casting a shadow across his eyes. He wasn't meant to speak, wasn't even meant to breathe outside cadence. But there are moments when silence becomes complicity, and in that instant he knew this was one of them. When the photographer nearest him raised his camera again and said quietly, "Hard to believe they let her wear Diana's piece." Something inside Tristan anchored. His voice, calm but firm, broke the rule that had governed every second of his service. That item was catalogued under memorial lock. It was never cleared for private wear. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. The sentence landed like a command. Every conversation in the hall stopped mid-syllable. Cameras turned. The sapphire pendant flashed under 20 converging lights. The two guards flanking him shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, but neither moved to silence him. That alone told the room everything. Camilla turned sharply, her expression flickering from shock to ice in a heartbeat. "Sergeant, you are not authorized to speak during a press session." "Then consider this a security breach, ma'am." The sound that followed was silence. Absolute brittle silence. Even the click of shutters halted. Laura froze, her face draining as attention pivoted toward her. Her fingers instinctively brushed the pendant as if shielding it from view. "It was given to me months ago. Mother said—" "Enough!" Camilla's voice sliced through the room, sharp as a blade. "Remove him at once!" But no one moved. Not the registrar, not the chamberlain, not even the press aides who normally scrambled to obey her tone. The registrar's eyes darted toward the pendant, then to Tristan. Her lips parted slightly as she realized what he was saying wasn't conjecture. It was fact. That piece had been under Diana's memorial seal since 1998, archived within the royal collection under non-circulation code. Tristan's stance never wavered. "Ma'am, those jewels were sealed under legacy preservation following the princess's passing. Any use outside authorized memorial display is unlawful under Crown Estate directives." The last phrase landed like a gavel. A reporter near the back whispered, "Unlawful," and the word echoed. Camilla's expression hardened, but there was something else behind it now. Fear. Fear not of Tristan, but of cameras already recording, of history already documenting what protocol had tried to suppress. Her voice dropped. "You're dismissed from this chamber, Sergeant. Immediately." Tristan's eyes met hers, calm, steady, unyielding. Then he pivoted on his heel, turned toward the exit, and marched the 12 measured steps out of the room. Behind him, the first shutter clicked again. And in that instant, the story was no longer hers to control. By nightfall, it would have a life of its own. The first clip surfaced less than 2 hours later. Grainy, vertical footage from a reporter's mobile phone, posted with the caption, "Royal Guard interrupts palace photoshoot over Princess Diana's jewels." Within minutes, it spread across X, then TikTok. Then came the edited versions, zoomed, enhanced, slowed down to highlight every word from Tristan Merrick's mouth. That item was catalogued under memorial lock, unlawful under Crown Estate directives. By nightfall, hashtags trended worldwide. Hashtag Diana's jewels, hashtag guard who spoke, hashtag Crown integrity. Even major outlets hesitated at first, unsure whether the confrontation was staged. But by morning, the BBC and ITV were both running quiet confirmatory reports. Windsor source confirms internal dispute over legacy jewellery classification. Camilla's office issued a clipped statement mid-morning. There was a brief misunderstanding during a pre-scheduled internal photo coordination. All items worn were personal. The matter is considered closed. But it wasn't. Not by the public, not by the family, and not by Princess Anne. Shortly after noon, Anne personally contacted Windsor's security command and requested a full chain of custody report for all items designated under the Diana Memorial Archive. She didn't ask. She issued it, citing her custodial oversight of the Royal Archives and her prior authorization of the preservation seal. The castle went quiet. Staff whispered. Emails stopped. Foot traffic slowed. Everyone sensed something larger moving beneath the marble. By early evening, an internal suspension order was delivered to Sergeant Merrick's quarters. Pending procedural review, no formal charges. No one said it aloud, but the implication was clear. He had spoken out against a royal. And yet, as he stepped through the main gates of Wellington Barracks, duffel over shoulder, something unexpected happened. A woman holding a tote bag at the base of the gatepost stepped back to let him pass, then whispered, "Thank you." A man beside her clapped once, short, not dramatic but deliberate. Another followed, then a third. They weren't protesters, they weren't paparazzi. They were civilians, Londoners who'd read the headlines and watched the clip. By the time Tristan reached the end of the stone path, 24 had gathered silently. Some held signs that read nothing more than a single name. Diana. He didn't stop, didn't wave, didn't speak. But for the first time since his suspension, he felt no disgrace, because in the eyes of the public he hadn't been dismissed. He'd stood up, and now others were standing with him. Behind the leaded glass of the Royal Collection Security Office, a closed-door inquiry convened in absolute silence. No press, no cameras, no family, only procedure. The chamber was lined with high back chairs and brass reading lamps, the atmosphere sterile and old-world, designed to reinforce formality. At the far end of the table sat the registrar, 2 senior archival officers, a Crown legal advisor, and a senior representative from Household Security. At the centre sat a mahogany document stand bearing a single tray. Camilla did not attend, neither did Laura. But Sergeant Tristan Merrick did. He stood, hands clasped behind his back, expression neutral, every inch the guardsman, despite the temporary suspension. His tunic had been replaced with a plain navy suit, but the posture hadn't changed. He didn't slouch, he didn't shrink, he waited. A Crown barrister began the inquiry. The concern before us pertains to the apparent use of a heritage jewellery piece, item D04B, known informally as the Sapphire brooch, believed to be under sealed classification within the Diana Memorial Archive. Sergeant Merrick, please confirm the sequence of what you observed. Tristan laid out the events without embellishment. The missing tag, the unlisted inventory discrepancy, Laura's appearance wearing what appeared to be the converted pendant, and the public confrontation. He did not raise his voice. He did not assign motive. I acted on protocol, not sentiment. Had it been any other artifact, seal, sword, or document, protocol would still require intervention. The household representative countered swiftly. The piece in question, we're told, is a modern recreation, personal jewellery belonging to the Queen Consort. Its similarity to the archived brooch is unfortunate, but coincidental. The room went still. Then the registrar, seated near the end, quietly pulled a folder from beneath her arm. No, it isn't. She opened the folder, extracted a plastic-sealed photograph taken in 1997, the original brooch on Diana's shoulder during a state luncheon in Brussels. Then a second image dated 3 days ago of Laura wearing the necklace. Then, from a padded envelope, she drew a fine-lens photograph of the Sapphire's rear etching, a tiny inscription reading D04B etched beneath the pendant's clasp. There was no ambiguity. It was the same piece. But the registrar wasn't finished. She pulled a second document from the folder, this one marked with the Clarence House crest, a work order dated 14 months earlier, requesting modification services for heritage brooch, conversion to pendant setting, discreet sourcing preferred. The invoice was signed by a senior aide in Camilla's household. Payment cleared through a discretionary account that required no parliamentary oversight. The modification wasn't commissioned by archives, the registrar said quietly. It was commissioned by private staff using Crown resources. The jeweller's log confirms the piece arrived with its original archival tag still attached. They were instructed to remove it. She slid the jeweller's statement across the table. Handwritten notes in the margin read, "Client requested no documentation of original provenance." The household representative's fingers went still on his pen. One of the archival officers leaned forward, reading the jeweller's statement twice before looking up. "That's not repurposing," he said. "That's erasure." Silence followed. Long, taut silence. The household representative looked down. The registrar spoke again, more pointed this time. "This item was sealed under royal decree. There are only 2 known keys to that archival chamber, one held by the custodian of the royal archives." She paused. "And one held by Her Majesty, the Queen Consort." At that moment the side door opened quietly. Princess Anne stepped into the room. She did not wait for invitation. She didn't sit. She simply looked at the registrar, then at the photograph of the pendant. Her voice was low. "I'd like to inspect the original archival log and see the key tracking audit myself." She glanced at Tristan, nodding once. "This will not be buried." The long gallery was quiet. Afternoon light slanted through leaded windows, tracing golden lines across the worn oak floors. It was the same corridor where monarchs had once walked in silence, where portraits stared down with oil-painted authority, and where scandal was usually addressed with decorum, not confrontation. Princess Anne stood near the tall window at the far end, gloved hands folded behind her back. She didn't turn when Tristan Merrick approached. She only spoke. "You reminded this palace that legacy isn't jewellery, it's conduct." Tristan paused, then stood at ceremonial ease, not out of formality, but instinct. "Ma'am." Anne finally turned to face him. Her expression wasn't soft, but it wasn't harsh either. It was resolute. "The brooch was taken without clearance. It was resealed this morning. The clasp engraving matches the 1997 Royal Archives serial number. Your report was accurate in every regard." Tristan didn't respond. Anne stepped closer, her voice dropping. "There are those in this palace who've forgotten that some items don't belong to us. They belong to memory. And when we use them for pageantry or vanity, we fracture more than protocol. We fracture trust." He nodded once. "I understand, ma'am. I've authorised a full restoration of the Diana Memorial Archive. Every piece, every note, every artefact will be recatalogued under double custody. I'll oversee it myself." Tristan blinked. That level of oversight hadn't been enacted since Queen Elizabeth's final decade. It was more than a correction. It was a message. "You'll also be reinstated. Windsor perimeter duty, effective immediately. No further inquiry." He held her gaze. "Thank you, ma'am." Anne hesitated for the first time. This wasn't just about a necklace, Sergeant. It was about who this family claims to be and who remembers why. Footsteps echoed faintly behind them, and Anne turned. From a side door at the gallery's far end, Laura Lopes appeared, eyes red, lips pressed together, walking quietly toward the exit. She paused when she saw them, then turned to her mother, who emerged just behind. The hallway froze. Camilla's face was pale, drawn. Her eyes locked onto Anne's for the briefest second, then shifted to Tristan. "You've humiliated the family," she said coldly to her daughter. Laura didn't flinch. Her voice was soft, almost ashamed, but it cut through the corridor like glass. "No, you did, when you tried to own what wasn't yours." Anne said nothing. Tristan didn't move. Camilla turned and walked away without another word, and for the first time since the confrontation, the palace felt like it had inhaled the truth and decided to stop pretending. The summons was discreet, but the implications were anything but. A Palace Ethics Council was convened inside St. James's Palace, in a secure boardroom known internally as the Quiet Room. No portraits, no cameras, just polished wood, a ticking clock, and a mandate for discretion. The council was chaired by Lord Chamberlain Harrow, flanked by 3 Privy Councillors, 2 archivists from the Royal Collection Trust, and an observer from the Sovereign Grant Committee. Oversight was provided jointly by Princess Anne and Prince William, whose presence was highly unusual but not unwelcome. Camilla did not attend. Her seat remained formally unoccupied, represented instead by Sir Alaric Finch, a seasoned royal solicitor whose voice was as crisp as his Windsor knot. The hearing opened with a visual record. Images of the sapphire brooch on Diana in 1990, the archival seal log from 1998, and the enhanced press photo showing the converted pendant around Laura Lopes' neck just 4 days earlier. Then came the forensic image. The clasp engraving, D04B, undeniable, unedited, unforgivable. Sir Alaric spoke smoothly. Her Majesty the Queen Consort maintains that the item was received as a gift from a private source and worn without knowledge of its classification. There was no intent to misuse legacy property. But the registrar countered plainly. There is no Crown record of declassification. The item never left archive custody until it was found on Lady Lopes. Next, Princess Anne addressed the council directly. Her tone was firm, clipped. Diana's personal artifacts were sealed by royal consensus. They were not heirlooms to be reshaped for visibility. They were preserved for dignity. That line was crossed. Prince William followed. Unlike his aunt, he didn't speak from anger. The question isn't whether the brooch was borrowed or gifted. The question is why a piece marked for memorial preservation ended up in private hands without a single signature or record. That's not inheritance, that's appropriation. A hush settled over the room. Lord Harrow delivered the ruling by 5:12 p.m. This council concludes that the unauthorised removal and redesign of a sealed legacy artefact constitutes a breach of custodial protocol. Effective immediately, all items linked to Diana, Princess of Wales, shall be returned to and remain under indefinite archival seal. No further use, display, or reissue of said items shall be permitted. The Queen Consort is relieved of all public ceremonial engagements for the remainder of the year, citing discretion and health. There would be no public scandal, no formal punishment. But inside the palace, the meaning was clear. Camilla had been checked by protocol, by family, by truth. That evening, a single update appeared on the royal household's website. Sergeant Tristan Merrick has resumed duty under full honours. His conduct remains in alignment with His Majesty's ceremonial code. The reinstatement was quiet, but the message echoed loudly. Some lines aren't crossed for style, not when they guard legacy. Sergeant Tristan Merrick returned to his post 3 days later. The air around Windsor was colder, the wind more cutting, but the green turf behind the guard's walk looked exactly as it always had. Prim, squared, unchanged by headlines or hashtags. He stood again in full dress, scarlet tunic crisp under morning light, buttons aligned, boots polished to regulation mirror. The tall black bearskin hat of the Royal Guard cast its silent shadow across his brow, but his eyes remained steady, calm, watchful, resolved. He didn't need applause, he didn't want it. What mattered now was position, protocol, stillness, and what no one could take from him. The right to stand where truth needed guarding, Mid-morning, as tourists passed in hushed curiosity, some still murmuring about the story they'd read online, the East Conservatory doors opened. Princess Anne stepped out alone, no escort, no cameras, just her presence. She walked the length of the lawn at an unhurried pace, a thick leather folder tucked under her arm. She didn't call for him, she didn't speak. But as she passed, she offered a single nod, subtle, deliberate. It was not approval. It was recognition. Just beyond her, two royal staffers wheeled a sealed glass case toward the rear corridor of the state apartments. The case contained 4 sapphire pieces, each documented and mounted against blue velvet. At the base of the display, a new brass plaque had been affixed. It read, "Memorial Integrity Collection, Diana, Princess of Wales, sealed under dual custody by royal decree, 2025. Tristan didn't turn to look at it. He didn't need to. He had seen it returned to its rightful place. In a palace that sometimes forgot the weight of memory, he had stood alone at first and refused to let that memory be rewritten. Now he stood not just for protocol, but for preservation, for legacy. And as the wind moved quietly across the quadrangle, his posture never shifted. His stance remained firm, still, disciplined, unbent. What do you think? Was Sergeant Merrick right to speak out in front of the press, even if it meant risking his career? And should Diana's jewels ever be worn again, or should they remain sealed in her memory forever? Drop your thoughts below, and if you believe some legacies should never be rewritten, hit like and subscribe with the bell icon turned on so you never miss a moment of truth behind the crown. Share this video with someone who still remembers Diana's grace, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another story that proves loyalty doesn't always mean silence. There's another video waiting for you on screen now. Click it next, and we'll see you there. Thanks for watching. And remember, not all guardsmen stay silent forever.